Hi, I'm Ed.
Hi, I'm Huw, and welcome to another edition of Tone Twins TV, and our very special guest.
Very special guest today,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the real deal.
A 1959 Les Paul Standard.
Which 9
is,
on the back of the headstock.
Yeah, which is known as the Richrath Burst. So it's named after a previous owner, namely Gary Richrath, from a very famous group, some of you might be old enough to remember, called REO Speedwagon.
It's an interesting point, actually. These bursts, they've not only taken on this sort of mythical status for their tone and things we'll chat about later on, but lots of them have taken on names, haven't they? Either previous owners
it's like a Stradivarius violin thing. I mean, it's probably a bit of an affectation, but it helps to distinguish. This one comes to us from a very good friend of ours called Andrew Raymond, who's the current owner. And this guitar, we should say from the outset, is currently for sale via Lucky Fret Music in London. And we're very, very privileged to have it and get the chance to try it out. And
thanks, Andrew. It's been it's an honour, real honour.
Yeah. So basically, what the idea is today, it's not going to be so much of a playing demo as really a feature on this guitar itself. We're going to be taking a really in-depth look at its specific features, and after we've done a bit of playing, we'll probably have a little bit of a chat about how it compares to copies and other vintage bursts that we've been lucky enough to have a go on.
So I guess this guitar, should we sort of start with the top? I mean, stunning. It's what the sort of Les Paul aficionados, they really focus on. There's a couple of features that this is sort of marked out almost as above the sort of pantheon of normal bursts. It's almost a step above, isn't it? But perhaps we'll start talking about the top on this. It's stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's got that. It's got the flame top. It's got as much flame as you could really expect or ever hope to have. But the difference with these guitars, it's like from some angles the flame you can't even see it, and then suddenly the light catches it in a certain direction and bang, it just pops out. So it's almost like a holographic effect.
Definitely.
And that's in stark contrast to a lot of modern guitars, particularly PRS would be a classic example, whereby they have really flamey tops, but the flame tends to be fixed.
You get a depth as well to the colour, don't you? The colour changes because it's faded over time, like you say, the sunlight. And I mean, this has obviously had a much richer red, which you can see behind the scratch plates, and so
it's really red under here.
But the way that it's not a consistent fade with the sunlight and so on, there's some sections which are slightly darker, some has gone that sort of lovely greeny colour, which seems almost impossible for modern guitar builders to replicate. The level of shine is different on the old ones as well.
Yeah, they tend to be really shiny, don't they? I know, there's a massive enthusiasm, and has been for a number of years, for relic guitars, but people just kind of tend to dull the finish. There's always, when you look at these guitars, the real thing, and especially ones in this kind of condition, there's always this kind of deep luster, isn't there? A really deep shine to it. They don't go dull at all.
One of the other features of this guitar, which sort of screams almost top of the burst tree, if you like, is of course the double white paths.
Double whites, yeah.
Double whites.
Wasn't there some thing about they only made them for a really short period of time?
Yeah, I think so. It was, I think late in 59, wasn't it? Something like that, through to 60. There was a period, and I think although these things have almost attained sort of mythical status, it was probably just a supply issue. I think Gibson couldn't get the black bobbins that you may see on many sort of pickups.
So they just did double whites instead.
Double whites instead. They were undercovers. No one was ever supposed to see them.
Yeah.
It was literally the case of getting a piece of plastic. Of course, for whatever reason, they've attained this status, probably because paths themselves are mythical pickups, aren't they? There's all this status around them.
Yeah.
And the rarest of the rare are the double whites. You of course get the blacks, you get the zebras, a few zebras, but you don't see many of these around.
Did you know that Gibson contacted Andrew to ask about doing a collector's choice version of this one, and they did all the measurements, they did all the scans and everything, and one of the problems they were going to have was the double whites, because Larry DiMarzio owns the rights to this double white look. So if they'd gone ahead with production, they were going to have to put DiMarzio's in a collector's choice.
Amazing.
Which might have sounded great, I don't know. The other irony is, although this maybe kind of elevates the status when you've got the flames plus the double whites, it's pretty well established that these double whites aren't the original pickups that were installed in this guitar. So they're PAFs, they're the real deal.
Yeah.
But this guitar did not leave the Gibson factory with this particular pair of pickups in it. It's widely supposed that these were installed by a later owner, someone who owned it actually after Gary Richrath.
I think nowadays, obviously, you treat these things with such kid gloves, but at the time there was a period when these were working instruments for musicians, high-end working instruments, but they were instruments. And if a pickup failed on a show, or if it was broke, or as was the case, I think with a couple of players, Dwayne Allman famously and stuff, they preferred the tone of another set of pickups they had from another guitar. There's some covers, I believe, in the case.
Yeah, there's a pair of original covers, and the case that comes with this guitar is the original Cali Girl case as well. The guitar is highly original, really, apart from that. However, there has been some repair work done to the finish on the back of the neck. The neck wasn't stripped, but in the areas where the finish had worn away to bare wood, somebody obviously decided at some point that it would be a nicer playing guitar if they just blew lacquer over the top of the surviving lacquer. As a consequence, the neck feels lovely. It's really smooth. There are no kind of ridges. There's none of that kind of rough feel you get with some vintage Gibsons.
It's superb. I mean, perhaps you lose a bit of that mojo of the bumps and the things that you'd get on some vintage guitars, but again, as a playing working instrument, it's a smooth, fantastic finish. And while we're at that, I mean, a neck profile to die for. A classic sort of 59, I would say. Well, yeah,
it's not as fat as some of the kind of 57, 58 ones. Yeah. It's actually a more refined neck profile, I would say. It's like more akin to what Gibson was doing, kind of like the 52, 53, 54 era.
That's right. I mean, you haven't perhaps quite got the same losing of the shoulders, a slight V that you can get with the early Les Pauls, but you've got no shoulder getting in the way all the way up, really. Obviously, over the years of playing and the work that's been done, there's such a beautiful rolled edges to the fingerboard. Not too thick a depth compared to, you see some reissues that or modern builders of, everyone thinks, vintage Les Paul must have a massive baseball neck, big thick. This, like you say, is more of a cultured sort of. It's just a beautiful feeling neck.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It's
absolutely
tremendous.
Stunning.
The other thing we should mention is that this guitar has recently been refretted, not for the first time. It wasn't playing well at all, so Andrew took the decision to have it refretted, and the luthier found that the neck actually had some issues where it was dipping in some places and there was a bit of a hump in this area. So having removed the frets, what he decided to do was to just shoot the board, get the whole board flat again before installing these fresh frets, and it has to be said, it's a pretty stellar fret job, and consequently the guitar just plays flawlessly now. It's weird with these vintage instruments. You sometimes think, because they're so old, they can't possibly be as playable or as slick or as kind of in tune as modern guitars. And when you come across instruments like this, you couldn't be more wrong. The other thing about this one, which is by no means the case with all vintage Gibsons, and Les Pauls included, is that the controls all work.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds funny, doesn't it? But so many of them just go really noisy and sticky, and they have various parts on the pot travel where the sound may cut out altogether. These ones actually work. All four of them
work really well.
And so far as we can tell, nothing's really been changed inside the control cavity, apart from wiring in a couple of new pickups. But the Bumblebee tone capacitors are the originals, and they're the earliest style oil-filled ones, so they're the paper oil ones. Yep. Not all the Bumblebees were paper oil.
So the pot's wiring harness appear to be original. So does the tailpiece and bridge?
Yeah, there's no retaining wire on the bridge, which means it's the earliest style ABR one. And the other thing, looking at it, it's fairly straight across the top. Some of these vintage bridges, after decades of downwards pressure from the strings, they develop a little kind of dip. They dip down towards the face of the guitar, and it compromises playability. In fact, they can bend so much that it's not really viable to keep them on the guitar if you want to enjoy playing it. Andrew's pointed out that somebody has made the notches in the saddles just a little bit deeper, probably in an attempt to lower the action a little bit when the neck was having playability issues and prior to its refret.
They appear to be the original saddles. Some of the earlier ones you see almost like a double sort of ridge on them, but these I think are the so later 59, where it's quite a straight sort of slope on them. Super lightweight tailpiece, huge factor in the tone actually. We found from other experiments and stuff.
The eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that one of these tuner keys is a slightly different colour. This is a replacement. The rest are all originals. And so far as we can tell, it's never had any Charlers or Grovers on it. So probably just one of the tuners stopped working and a replacement was found. These are absolutely fine. Another bit that's missing, the original nut is long gone. But the replacement is a nylon nut, which is what they used in the factory. And after the refret, the guy who did the refret just put a little bit of a shim underneath the nut just to raise it up a little bit, and it's playing perfectly.
There was a story, again, we don't know the provenance, but that Gary Richrath liked to have brass nuts on his Les Pauls. So possibly, who's to say, we weren't there, but possibly there was an era in guitar sort of time when people really liked brass parts. Could be that it had, or it could just be one of these things, casualty of usage and refrets and tweaks over the years. Nuts and things can go, but it's a stellar job. It does the job perfectly. Plays really nicely in tune, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's the right material.
This guitar in particular, then, we've noted that the pickups as they are quite aggressive sounding paths anyway, despite the fact that they're sort of jacked up. It's a heavy Les Paul, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Just to put it into context again, we've been lucky enough to play a few vintage Les Pauls, again, thanks Andrew. And all the ones we've tried, they've all been under £9. By and large, the 1959s, 1960s that we've had a kind of round about 8.3, 8.4, 8.5. So at £9.5, this is a particularly heavy example, and we find that has a knock-on effect on the acoustic tone, which again can be heard in the plugged-in tone. So how would you describe the acoustic response to this compared to other vintage bursts? Yeah,
I'd say it does have a really thick, strong sort of low mid-range, a real solidity to the tone. Like say the weight gives a certain heaviness to the tone. The real direct, forceful note, isn't there, to this guitar? Yeah,
it's a really kind of muscular tone. What I would say is that compared to lighter bursts and even lighter modern Les Pauls like Collector's Choices, this hasn't got the same kind of snappy, airy acoustic quality
that's true.
That those guys have. On the other hand,
definitely unplugged, you notice that.
Oh, certainly,
more,
unplugged it's completely different. But you do notice that there's a very long and even decay, so it does sustain unusually well.
I mean, this is the classic example of that Les Paul sustain. It really does ring and ring.
We're veering into Spinal Tap territory.
Well, the best place to be.
Okay, so plugged in, it is a really powerful, muscular, rocking kind of Les Paul. It's not so much the kind of bluesy, delicate, Peter Greeny kind of tone. It's still does all the things you'd expect a burst to do, but it's a rock.
It certainly is the most rocking burst I've played. You know, it's got, like you say, muscular is a great tone, big, thick, wide, strong, powerful. Pickups obviously help. Great clarity, great cut. Takes gain fantastically well. You know, you don't lose any clarity playing up and down the neck. Real strong chunkiness to the notes. Paths give that sparkly top end still. They do give that airiness, the range of cleanup and so on. But you've got that muscular low end, which and there's other bursts which are more, perhaps cliche, but more vintage tone. They sort of sit nicely in the middle and they do everything and they're delicate and they're sort of very beautiful. This has a nice rounded top end, but it's a rock and roll instrument, isn't it? It really is.
Exactly.
been an honour and a privilege to sort of spend time with this burst today. So again, thanks Andrew.
And thanks to Lucky Fret Music, who currently are handling the sale of this guitar.
Take care, we'll see you all soon for another video.
And don't forget to subscribe, buttons down there.
Please do. Thanks so much, take care.
All the best.
Hwyl fawr.